The forest was alive with whispers, rustling leaves, distant howls, and the faint crunch of paws on dry earth. Max, a lean and battle-scarred German shepherd, moved silently through the shadows. His amber eyes glinted in the fading light, scanning for danger. Hunger gnawed at his ribs, but instinct drove him forward as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting long shadows across the leaf-strewn ground. Max's ears twitched. A new sound cut through the stillness, a cry, high-pitched and fragile. It wasn't the call of an animal. It was human. Max froze, his body tense. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the earthy smells of the woods, but it grew stronger with every step. It wasn't the scent of prey, it was different, foreign, yet unmistakably alive. Against his better judgment, Max followed the sound. His powerful paws crunched softly against the dry leaves as he moved cautiously, his ears twitching and nostrils flaring. The cries grew louder, more distinct, and soon he found himself standing at the edge of a small clearing. There, nestled awkwardly among the roots of a massive oak tree, was the source of the sound. A baby. The child was wrapped in a tattered, mud-streaked blanket, its tiny fists flailing weakly as it wailed into the encroaching dusk. Max froze, his gaze locked on the infant. The sight of the child sent conflicting instincts racing through his mind. Hunger clawed at him mercilessly, urging him to turn away, to leave this fragile creature to its fate. But another instinct, deeper and more inexplicable, rooted him to the spot. Max took a cautious step forward, his massive paws crunching softly against the dry leaves. The baby's cries faltered as though sensing his presence. Max's nose twitched as he sniffed the air, his head tilting slightly in curiosity. For a moment, he stood motionless, his amber eyes wide with uncertainty. Then, against all odds, Max did something extraordinary. He lay down beside the baby, curling his body protectively around a tiny figure. The warmth of the infant's frail body against his own sparked something unfamiliar in Max, something that felt almost like purpose. He let out a low, comforting whine, his hunger momentarily forgotten. The once feral dog, shaped by years of fighting and survival, had chosen to guard the most vulnerable creature he'd ever encountered. As the night deepened, the forest grew colder. A biting wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the distant howls of unseen predators. Max, despite his exhaustion, remained vigilant. His body formed a shield around the baby, blocking the chill of the night. The child's cries had quieted, reduced to soft whimpers, its tiny chest rising and falling with fragile breaths. Max's amber eyes scanned the darkness, his ears twitching at every sound. He knew the forest was unforgiving, an endless expanse where the strong survived and the weak perished. But tonight, something was different. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was protecting something far more fragile than himself. The baby stirred, letting out a faint sound, and Max lowered his massive head to sniff at the bundle. The child's scent was strange, but not unpleasant, a mixture of earth, cloth, and innocence. His nose nudged the blanket closer around the infant, an action born not of understanding, but of instinct. The deep, primal urge to protect overrode his hunger, his fatigue, and his pain. The next morning, the forest stirred with the faint light of dawn. Max's amber eyes blinked open, his body still curled protectively around the baby. The infant slept peacefully, its tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Max's ears twitched at the sound of rustling leaves, his instincts immediately on alert. A rustling in the underbrush caught his attention. He growled, low and warning, his body tensing as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a boy, no older than 10, with dirt-streaked cheeks and tattered clothes. His dark hair was matted, and his eyes were wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. It was Ravi, a beggar boy who had been surviving on his own in the forest. Ravi froze when he saw Max, his breath catching in his throat. The German shepherd's powerful frame and piercing eyes were intimidating, but then Ravi noticed the baby nestled against the dog's side. His fear softened into confusion. "You're protecting it?" Ravi whispered, his voice trembling. He took a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Max's growl softened, but his body remained tense, his amber eyes locked on the boy. Ravi's gaze shifted to the baby, his expression softening. "I can help," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I know these woods. I can find food, water, whatever you need." Max studied the boy, his instincts telling him Ravi was no threat. The dog's nose twitched as he sniffed the air, catching the scent of earth and sweat, but no malice. With a low whine, Max allowed Ravi to approach. Ravi knelt a few feet away, his eyes never leaving Max. "I've been out here for weeks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know where to find things, berries, roots, even fish from the stream. I can help you keep the baby safe." Max's tail gave a faint wag, the first sign of trust. Ravi smiled hesitantly, his fear giving way to determination. "Okay," he said, nodding to himself. "We'll do this together." As the day wore on, Ravi proved his worth. He led Max to a patch of wild berries, carefully picking the ripest ones and offering them to the dog. Max sniffed the berries cautiously before eating them, his hunger momentarily satisfied. Next, Ravi found a small stream, its clear water glistening in the sunlight. He cupped his hands and drank deeply before filling a makeshift container he had fashioned from a large leaf. "Here," he said, holding the water out to Max. The dog lapped at it gratefully. His thirst quenched, Ravi's resourcefulness didn't stop there. Using a sharp stick, he managed to catch a fish from the stream, its silvery scales flashing in the sunlight. He cooked it over a small fire, the smell of roasted fish filling the air. Max watched intently, his tail wagging as Ravi shared the meal with him. The baby, meanwhile, remained quiet, its tiny hands clutching the tattered blanket. Ravi gently wiped its face with a damp cloth, his touch surprisingly tender for a boy who had spent so much time alone. "You're lucky," Ravi murmured to the baby. "You've got Max looking out for you, and now me, I guess." Max let out a soft whine, his eyes never leaving the baby. Ravi glanced at the dog, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're not so scary after all," he said. "Just a big softy." "Huh?" The forest had fallen eerily silent, the usual chorus of birds and insects replaced by an oppressive stillness. Max's ears perked up, his amber eyes scanning the shadows. His body tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring. Ravi, sensing the dog's unease, clutched the baby tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" Ravi whispered, his voice barely audible. Max's growl deepened, a low, menacing rumble that sent shivers down Ravi's spine. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken danger. Ravi's eyes darted around the clearing, searching for the source of Max's alarm. Then they appeared, glowing eyes in the darkness, moving closer with predatory grace. Wolves. Ravi's breath caught in his throat. "Max," he whispered, his voice trembling. The lead wolf stepped into the clearing, its sleek body low to the ground, its yellow eyes locked onto Ravi and the baby, its lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. The other wolves followed, their movements synchronized and deliberate. They circled the clearing, their growls cutting through the stillness like knives. Max stepped forward, his body low and ready. His powerful frame positioned itself between the wolves and Ravi, his growl echoing through the trees. Ravi scrambled to his feet, holding the baby close. "What do we do?" Ravi whispered, his voice shaking. The lead wolf lunged, its jaws snapping inches from Max's face. Max met it head on, his powerful jaws clamping down on the wolf's shoulder. The wolf yelped, thrashing wildly to break free, but Max held firm. The pack circled, their growls growing louder. Ravi grabbed a stick, swinging it wildly to keep the wolves at bay. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. Max fought with everything he had, his body a blur of motion. He bit, clawed, and snarled, driving the wolves back one by one. But they were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Another wolf darted in from the side, its teeth grazes Max's flank. Max twisted sharply, his powerful jaws snapping at the attacker and forcing it to retreat with a yelp. Ravi's heart raced as he watched the battle unfold. He had never seen anything like it. Max, a lone dog, standing his ground against an entire pack of wolves. The baby stirred in his arms, its tiny cries adding to the chaos. "It's okay," Ravi murmured to the baby, though his voice shook. "Max has got this." But the wolves were cunning. They began to spread out, their movements calculated to overwhelm Max from all sides. The lead wolf, now bloodied but undeterred, lunged again, its teeth aiming for Max's throat. Max dodged, his movements slower now as exhaustion began to take its toll. Ravi's mind raced. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He had to do something. Gripping the stick tighter, he stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "Leave us alone!" he shouted, swinging the stick at the nearest wolf. The wolf snarled, its eyes narrowing as it turned its attention to Ravi. Max let out a fierce bark, his body slamming into the wolf before it could reach the boy. The force of the impact sent the wolf sprawling, but Max stumbled, his legs trembling under the strain. The pack hesitated, their confidence wavering as they assessed the situation. But the lead wolf wasn't ready to give up. It let out a low, guttural growl, signaling the others to regroup. Max stood his ground, his chest heaving as he faced the pack. His body was battered, his fur matted with blood and dirt, but his resolve remained unbroken. He let out a deep, guttural growl, a final warning to the wolves. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening roar, Max charged at the lead wolf, his jaws clamped down on its neck. The wolf yelped, thrashing wildly as it tried to break free. The other wolves hesitated, their growls fading into uneasy whimpers. Just as Max's strength began to wane, a shot rang out. The sound echoed through the forest. Sharp and sudden, the wolves scattered, their glowing eyes disappearing into the shadows. Ravi froze, his heart pounding as he turned toward the source of the noise. A man stepped into the clearing. The man, weathered and kind-hearted, with a rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes scanned the scene, taking in the battered dog, the trembling boy, and the tiny bundle in his arms. "Easy now," the man said, lowering his rifle. His voice was calm but firm, a steady presence in the chaos. "You're safe." Max let out a low whine, his body sagging with exhaustion. Ravi stared at the man, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Who are you?" Ravi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man knelt, his eyes softening as he looked at the baby. "Someone who can help," he said. "Let's get you all out of here." The man led them through the dense forest, his steps steady and sure. Max limped behind him, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Ravi followed closely, the baby cradled protectively in his arms. The forest seemed quieter now, as if holding its breath after the chaos of the wolves' attack. After what felt like hours, they reached a small cabin nestled in a clearing. The structure was weathered but sturdy, its wooden walls standing firm against the elements. Smoke curled from the chimney, a sign of life in the otherwise desolate wilderness. "This is it," the man said, pushing open the creaking door. "It's not much, but it's safe." Inside, the cabin was modest but warm. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The man gestured to a pile of blankets in the corner. "Make yourselves comfortable. I'll get some food." Ravi hesitated, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. Max nudged him gently, his amber eyes reassuring. With a small nod, Ravi settled the baby on the blankets, tucking the tattered fabric around its tiny frame. The man returned with a pot of stew, its savory aroma filling the cabin. He handed Ravi a bowl, his expression softening as he watched the boy eat hungrily. "You've been through a lot," he said, "but you're safe now." Max lay down beside the baby, his body still tense despite the warmth of the fire. His ears twitched at every sound, his instincts on high alert. The man noticed and gave the dog a reassuring pat. "You've done well," he said, "but you can rest now." The man taught Ravi how to set traps and identify edible plants, while Max kept watch over the baby. For the first time in weeks, Ravi felt a glimmer of hope, but the forest was unforgiving, and danger was never far. One evening, as the group gathered around a fire, the sound of footsteps echoed through the trees. Max's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "Stay close," the man whispered, gripping his rifle. His eyes scanned the darkness, his body tense with anticipation. From the shadows emerged 3 men, the strangers. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold and calculating. One of them stepped forward, a knife glinting in his hand. "Well, well," the leader sneered, "what do we have here? A dog, a kid, and a baby. Looks like we hit the jackpot." Max stepped forward, his growl deepening. Ravi clutched the baby tightly, his eyes wide with fear. The man raised his rifle, his voice steady but firm. "You're not welcome here," the leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think that toy scares us?" Before anyone could react, Max lunged, his powerful body colliding with the leader. The man stumbled, dropping his knife. The other 2 attackers hesitated, their confidence wavering. The man fired a warning shot into the air, the sound echoing through the forest. "Next one won't miss," he warned. The strangers backed away, their bravado crumbling. The leader spat on the ground, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't over," he snarled before disappearing into the shadows. The cabin fell silent, the tension slowly dissipating. Ravi's hands trembled as he held the baby, his mind racing with what-ifs. "Are they gone?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, his expression grim. "For now. But we need to be ready. They'll be back." Max let out a low whine, his body sagging with exhaustion. The man knelt beside him, inspecting the dog's wounds. "You're a fighter," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "But even fighters need to rest." Ravi watched as the man tended to Max, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." The man looked up, his eyes softening. "We're in this together," he said, "and we'll get through it together." The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting a golden glow over the forest. The group was preparing to leave the cabin, their supplies packed and their spirits cautiously hopeful. The man had decided it was no longer safe to stay. The strangers could return at any moment, and the forest was too vast to risk lingering in one place for too long. Max stood at the edge of the clearing, his amber eyes scanning the trees. His body was still battered from the wolves' attack, but his resolve was unshaken. Ravi adjusted the baby's sling, his movements careful and deliberate. The man checked his rifle one last time, his expression grim but determined. As they stepped out of the cabin, a sound stopped them in their tracks, a cry for help, faint but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" Ravi asked, his voice trembling. The man nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Stay close," he said, his tone low and urgent. They moved cautiously toward the sound, Max leading the way. His ears twitched, his nose sniffing the air for any sign of danger. The cry grew louder, more desperate, until they reached a small clearing. There, slumped against a tree, was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She looked up as they approached, her eyes wide with fear and relief. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Help me." The man lowered his rifle, his expression softening. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Sophie," she said, clutching her side. "I've been lost for days. I thought I was going to die out here." Ravi stepped forward, his curiosity outweighing his caution. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Sophie nodded weakly. "I twisted my ankle. I can't walk." The man knelt beside her, assistant inspecting her injury. "We'll take care of you," he said, "but we need to move. It's not safe here." Sophie hesitated, glancing around the forest. "I wasn't alone," she admitted. "Before I got lost, I was supposed to meet a rescue team near the river. If they're still looking for me, they might not be far." Ravi's eyes widened. "A rescue team?" he asked. Sophie nodded. "They were coming from a nearby town. If we can reach them, we'll be safe." The man exchanged a look with Ravi and Max. "Then we need to move fast," he said. With the man's help, Sophie limped back to the cabin. Ravi watched her closely, his young mind trying to make sense of this new addition to their group. Max stayed close, his instincts telling him Sophie was no threat. Once inside, Sophie sank onto a pile of blankets, her exhaustion evident. Ravi handed her a cup of water, which she drank gratefully. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're safe now, but we need to stick together. The forest is full of dangers." Sophie's eyes fell on the baby, her expression softening. "Is that your child?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Ravi shook his head. "We found her in the forest. Max has been protecting her." Sophie's gaze shifted to Max, her eyes widening as she took in the dog's powerful frame and watchful eyes. "He's amazing," she said, her voice filled with admiration. Max let out a soft whine, his tail wagging faintly. It was as if he sensed Sophie's kindness and accepted her into the group. Over the next few days, Sophie's presence brought a new sense of warmth to the group. Her nurturing nature shone through as she cared for the baby, her gentle hands soothing the child's cries. She even managed to earn Max's trust, the dog allowing her to get close to the baby without hesitation. Ravi, too, found comfort in Sophie's presence. She reminded him of the mother he had lost, her soft words and reassuring smile easing the ache in his heart. One evening, as they sat around a fire, Sophie turned to the man. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady but concerned. The man sighed, his gaze fixed on the flames. "We need to find a way out of the forest, somewhere safe, where we can start over." Sophie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know a place," she said, "a small town not far from here. It's safe, or at least it used to be." The man's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about it?" Sophie hesitated, her gaze dropping to the baby in her arms. "I was heading there when I got lost. It's where I was planning to start a new life." Ravi's eyes lit up. "Do you think we can make it?" Sophie smiled, her hand resting on his shoulder. "If we stick together, we can do anything." As the fire crackled and the night deepened, the group felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, bound by loyalty, love, and the will to survive. Max lay beside the baby, his amber eyes watching over the group. His journey had begun with a single cry in the forest, but it had led him to something far greater, a purpose, a family, and a chance at a new life. The forest had grown quiet again, but the silence was deceptive. The group had spent days preparing for the journey to the town Sophie had mentioned, their hope growing with each passing hour. But the forest was relentless, and danger was never far. One evening, as the group gathered around the fire, the sound of howls echoed through the trees. The man's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. "They're back," he said, his voice low and urgent. Max stood at the door, his growl deep and menacing. His amber eyes glinted in the firelight, his body tense and ready. Ravi and Sophie exchanged worried glances, their hearts pounding. "What do we do?" Ravi asked, his voice trembling. "Barricade the windows," the man ordered, his tone firm, "and stay close to the baby." Ravi and Sophie moved quickly, using whatever they could find to reinforce the cabin's weak points. Max remained at the door, his growl growing louder as the howls drew closer. The wolves emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. The lead wolf, larger and more menacing than the others, stepped forward, its lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. Max's growl deepened, his body low and ready. The man raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Stay back," the man warned, his voice steady but firm. The lead wolf lunged, its jaws snapping at Max's throat. Max dodged, his movements swift and precise. He countered with a powerful swipe of his paw, forcing the wolf to retreat with a yelp. The man fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the forest. The wolves hesitated, their growls fading into uneasy whimpers, but the pack was relentless. They circled the cabin, their movements calculated and deliberate. Max fought fiercely, his body a blur of motion. He bit, clawed, and snarled, driving the wolves back one by one. But they were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Rafi and Sophie watched from inside the cabin, their hearts racing. The baby stirred in Sophie's arms, its tiny cries adding to the chaos. "We have to do something," Ravi said, his voice filled with desperation. Sophie nodded, her eyes scanning the room for anything they could use as a weapon. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the hearth, her hands trembling but determined. "Stay here," she told Ravi, her voice firm. "Protect the baby." Sophie stepped outside, her heart pounding as she joined the man and Max. The lead wolf turned its attention to her, its eyes narrowing. "Get back inside," the man shouted, his voice filled with urgency. But Sophie stood her ground, the poker raised high. "We're not going down without a fight," she said, her voice steady. Max let out a fierce bark, his body slamming into the lead wolf. The two animals tumbled to the ground, their growls filling the air. The man fired another shot, this time aiming at the ground near the wolves. The sound startled them, their confidence wavering. Max took advantage of the distraction, his powerful jaws clamping down on the lead wolf's neck. The wolf yelped, thrashing wildly as it tried to break free. Finally, with a deafening roar, Max forced the wolf to retreat. The pack hesitated, their growls fading into uneasy whimpers. The lead wolf let out a low, guttural snarl before turning and disappearing into the shadows. The others followed, their glowing eyes vanishing like fading embers. The forest fell silent, the tension slowly dissipating. Max limped back to the cabin, his body battered but unbroken. Sophie knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she inspected his wounds. "You're amazing," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. The man lowered his rifle, his expression grim but relieved. "We need to move," he said. "They'll be back." Ravi stepped outside, the baby cradled in his arms. "Are we going to make it?" he asked, his voice trembling. The man placed a hand on Ravi's shoulder, his eyes softening. "As long as we stick together, we'll be okay." As the group prepared to leave the cabin, they felt a glimmer of hope. The wolves had been driven back, but the journey ahead was far from over. Max stood at the front of the group, his amber eyes scanning the forest. His journey had begun with a single cry in the forest, but it had led him to something far greater, a purpose, a family, and a chance at a new life. The forest was bathed in the soft light of dawn, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the dense canopy. The group had spent a restless night after the wolves' attack, their bodies weary, but their spirits unbroken. Max lay by the fire, his amber eyes scanning the trees. His body was battered, but his resolve remained strong. As they prepared to leave the cabin, a new sound reached their ears, the distant rumble of engines. "Do you hear that?" Ravi asked, his voice filled with hope. The man nodded, his expression cautious but hopeful. "Sounds like vehicles. Could be help." Sophie's eyes lit up. "It's them," she said, her voice trembling with relief. "The rescuers. They must have been searching for me." The sound grew louder, the engines cutting through the morning mist. Sophie stepped out of the cabin, waving her arms and shouting, "Over here!" A team of rescuers emerged from the trees, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. They wore uniforms and carried equipment, their faces filled with relief as they spotted Sophie. "We've been looking for you," one of the rescuers said, rushing to her side. He knelt beside her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you okay?" Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm fine, but we need help. There's a baby and a boy and a dog." The rescuers turned their attention to the cabin, their flashlights illuminating the small group. Ravi stood in the doorway, the baby cradled in his arms. Max stood beside him, his body tense and his amber eyes watchful. As the rescuers approached, Max let out a low growl, his body positioning itself between them and the baby. "Easy, boy," Sophie said, her voice soothing. "They're here to help." Max's growl softened, but his eyes remained fixed on the strangers. One of the rescuers knelt, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're not here to hurt anyone." Ravi stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "Max saved us. He protected the baby. He's a hero." The rescuers exchanged glances, their respect for the dog evident. One of them reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of jerky, offering it to Max. "Here, boy," he said, his voice gentle. "You've earned this." Max sniffed the offering cautiously before taking it, his tail wagging faintly. The rescuers quickly assessed the group, providing food, water, and medical attention. Sophie explained their ordeal, her voice filled with emotion as she recounted Max's bravery. "This dog saved our lives," she said, her hand resting on Max's head. "He's more than just a dog. He's family." The rescuers nodded, their admiration for Max clear. "We'll make sure he's taken care of," one of them said. "But first, let's get you all out of here." As they prepared to leave, Ravi knelt beside Max, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You're the best," he whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I'll never forget what you did for us." Max let out a soft whine, his tail wagging as he nuzzled Ravi's hand. The rescuers led the group through the forest, their flashlights cutting through the morning mist. The journey was slow but steady, the group's spirits lifted by the promise of safety. As they reached the edge of the forest, the sight of waiting vehicles filled them with relief. The rescuers helped them into the trucks, their voices calm and reassuring. Sophie sat beside Ravi, the baby cradled in her arms. Max lay at their feet, his amber eyes watching over them. "We made it," Ravi said, his voice filled with awe. Sophie smiled, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Thanks to Max," she said, "and to all of us. We stuck together, and that's what matters." As the vehicles pulled away, the forest faded to the distance. The group was safe, their ordeal finally over. Max's story quickly spread, his bravery earning him the title of a hero. But for Ravi, Sophie, and the baby, he was more than that. He was family, the group found safety, and a new beginning in a small town. Ravi found a home with the man, Sophie became the baby's guardian, and Max, once a stray, became a beloved member of their family. As the years passed, Max remained by their side, a loyal guardian and a symbol of resilience. The forest had tested them, but together they had found hope, love, and a place to call home. Max's journey, which began with a single cry in the forest, had led him to something far greater, a purpose, a family, and a chance at a new life.